Congrats on getting beyond $1 million. What got you here won't always get you there. This is a podcast for entrepreneurs who want to reach beyond their 7-figure business and scale to 8, 9, and even 10 figures. I'm Brad Weimert, and as the founder of EasyPay Direct, I have had the privilege to work with more than 30,000 businesses, allowing me to see the data behind what some of the most successful companies on the planet are doing differently. Join me each week as I dig in with experts in sales, marketing, operations, technology, and wealth building. And you'll learn some of the specific tools, tactics, and strategies that are working today in those multi-million, 8, 9, and 10-figure businesses. Life can get exciting beyond $1 million. Darius Mirshahzadeh. I love hanging out, man. I'm so glad that we got you back in the studio because we've actually had you once before, but the format of our rambling did not quite fit the frame of Beyond $1 Million.
I think I got drunk during that show.
You think?
You're like, you want to try some amazing bourbon? And I was like, hell yeah.
Yeah.
That went sideways.
It was fantastic. I don't even think it went sideways. It was perfect. We had lots of fun, talked about lots of great things, and we have that one. It's not even locked in the vault. It's just chilling. It's chilling, waiting for an occasion. It was a blast.
That was fun.
But today, I want to talk about specifically things that you've done phenomenally well with, which is founded on building companies. So you've built a few companies, and you have been the operator of them. Can you give me just backdrop, stats, numbers, the last couple of companies, because it's impressive and it's a good place to start.
Yeah. So my biggest win was the last win, and as a company called The Money Source, TMS is what we go by, go by now. One of the largest mortgage services in the United States. I got there in 2013. I did a joint venture with the owner, became an owner thereafter. And from 13 through, when I got there, it was a pretty small company, about 30 employees, grew to 1,000 employees in 3 years.
Good God.
Yeah. It was a rocket ship, man.
And these are W-2 employees?
Straight up. I'm not even including outsource. I'm not including anything else. Like people who I was paying their health insurance and 401k matching.
And your role was?
I was CEO of the company. And I was an owner. Other companies, 4 of us who were owners, and I was chief executive officer, and I was kind of like the brains around scale. How do you scale this thing? That was my part. Did over those years, we grew it. The biggest we got to was $209 million in revenue per year.
Awesome.
We did collectively about $1.2 billion in the 7 years I was CEO. And not like a bullshit pass through like someone else's revenue account is mine. Like this is like legit our money.
I love that. I love that disclaimer.
Yeah. Well, you see it sometimes. People are like, 8-figure CEO. And I'm like, you're a trucking company and you're counting the inventory of somebody into your revenue numbers. Like that's kind of bullshit.
I see it a lot of times.
A lot of people do that, right?
Totally.
And I just, I'm like, well, that's not really revenue. If I count, because we use like brokers were our clients. I didn't count they get 3 points on every deal. I didn't count that in the revenue. That's our piece of the revenue. So it was a legit over $100 million company. But having been a serial bootstrapper, I grew 7-figure companies, 8-figure companies, and then that was my 9-figure company that I built. I exited the company in July 20. I think that year they did $400 million in revenue. So I take credit for that, even though I wasn't the CEO.
You should.
I'm like, hey, and they may have even hit $500 million. But it was a big deal. Like I learned a lot about how do you grow companies, right? How do you scale every aspect of the business? Because I'm pretty hands-on. And since then I've gone on, I advise a bunch of entrepreneurs and CEOs, mostly 8 and 9-figure CEOs, some 7. I know 7 feels big to a lot of people. For me, it's like, that's kind of the first step when you have people that you got to go manage, like where you have management.
Yeah.
But I can kind of see it through all the way. Prior to that, I did joint ventures and I was entrepreneur and CEO of my first company. I had built an 8-figure company through a joint venture. That was a very quick win. Prior to that was a company I built with my brother called Twin Capital Mortgage. So all this was in the mortgage lending space.
Got it.
And I did every part of it. Retail, wholesale, correspondent, which is where you're the bank lender for lenders, servicing, where we're servicing loans for people. So every aspect of the business I've done. And with Twin Capital, I was 25 when I started that company, and I started it myself and like an assistant. And I grew it from that to almost 10 million in revenue in 3 years.
Crazy.
Yeah, it was a wild ride. So we were number 40 in the Inc. 5000, 40 fastest private growing company in the United States. I was in my mid 20s. I had no fucking clue what I was doing. Like none. So what I ended up doing.
What years were those?
Those 03 to 06 was when we did Inc. And when we, those growth years. 06 was when we peaked out. We were like 8.6 million, 8.4 million. And then 07 was when the mortgage market imploded.
You don't say.
I was on track for 10 million that year.
Yeah.
And then I quickly went from about 800K run rate per month to under 200K. Woo! If your run rate goes from 800,000 a month to $150,
there's some cash flow problems.
You're fucked.
Yeah.
So I
say it lightly.
So I went, that month that happened was August of 07. In September of 07, I was at the Inc. 5000 conference, black tie affair, getting my award.
Love it.
And I would joke that I said
brutal.
I was the 40th fastest shrinking company in the United States.
Oh, brutal.
When I went to get that award. So it sucked. But what had happened was, which was interesting, was a year before that, I got accepted into a program at MIT called Birthing of Giants.
I've heard about this.
It's a pretty famous program. Got to be under the age of 40. Back then, it's changed now, but you have to be under the age of 40. You need to have a super high growth company. It's like 10% acceptance rate, and it's 3-year program.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got into it, and that was when because in like 06, I had this hyper growth company. I didn't know what I was doing. Like I nicknamed myself the firefighter. And what I would do is jump from department to department, putting out fires 30 days at a time. Mm-hmm. And then I'd be back in ops, sales, marketing, those kind of my
Jesus.
Yeah, it sucked.
I'm familiar.
Yeah, probably a lot of people, right?
100%.
Those are 3 important parts of the business, right?
It's also sort of the gap of, the 0 to 1 million. It's a notable accomplishment, and you get to 1 million, then you realize that the gap from there to 10 is a different thing.
Yep.
Right. And the systems and processes or lack thereof are the struggle, and the good people might be the struggle. Also, it depends on the industry. The question, there are so many different things to dig into, because you've done the 7-figure, the 8-figure, the 9-figure. You've done, 1 to 3 employees in the company to 1,000 employees in the company, all in the same industry. So you've got basically the model, but you have to have done things differently from one to the other to grow that way at different times. But the question before we get into that I'm curious about is, you went through, mortgages are so directly tied to economic growth and decline. When you went through the next phases of the 8-figure and the 9-figure companies, did it adjust the way you operated, thinking about the cycles? Like right now, for example, in September of 2022, we're in a down cycle for mortgages. And my friends that have mortgage companies, half their business disappeared right away because rates went up. So refis disappeared and revenue disappeared.
Right. Yeah. So mortgages, I always say the average temperature in mortgage is 50 degrees year round. It just half the time it's 100 degrees and half the time it's 0 degrees.
That's good.
Yeah. So a very volatile industry. So it's what that does is it makes you into a fucking athlete for scale. Because you scale up super fast, you scale down really fast. So I became this athlete. Like I'm like the LeBron James of scale, because I need to be able to grow really fast to grab it when the rates are there. And then they'll peak and they'll come in really hard. And like, I don't need 1,000 people. So I didn't tell you the in-between. I told you what you wanted to hear.
Yes.
Right. Which was, there's a really good quote, which is success has many fathers and failure is an orphan. You heard this before?
No.
Yeah, it's really fun to talk about success. No one talks about the hard shit, right? So we went from 0 to 1,000 or 13 to 1,000 people or something like that in 3 years. In set 16, in November 16, Trump got elected and rates popped hard. I went from 1,000 to 450 employees in 4 months.
Wow.
Athlete, dude. Like high jump. And then I scaled it back to 1,000 over the next 2.5 years. So what I learned, especially at, I guess, now I advise a lot of companies of different shapes and sizes. I always tell them like 1,000-person company is really just 10-person companies, right? The difference is you need different scaffolding at these different, to support those groups of 10. If I have one group of 10, I don't need much scaffolding because there's only one group of 10 to manage. If I have 10 groups of 10, I need different scaffolding to manage those 10 groups of 10 than I did the one group of 10. Just like when I have 100 groups of 10, I need different scaffolding than when I had 10 groups of 10. So that scaffolding is really like corporate infrastructure. And I got it.
I'm tracking.
Yeah, right. Totally makes sense, right?
Totally.
When you think of it that way.
Yeah.
Because I always say, like, a manager, it's not in my quote. It's like, this is just like common knowledge. It's like a manager can't really manage more than 10 people effectively. So it's one group of 10 is like one little pod. The issue is, depending on how fast you grow, well, depending how quickly you can put that scaffolding up, right? And it can be in any department, HR, accounting, marketing, sales, ops. No, that's most of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you need different scaffolding for different groups depending on how the velocity of scale and the how wide it is, right? So when I'm going to...
What do you mean, how wide?
Yeah, so how many groups of 10?
Got it.
Right? So when I went from 30 to 300, that was just, 30 groups of 10. I actually you could get there pretty easily without a ton of scaffolding because you're still small enough. You're kind of like what they say, the perfect size of a tribe is 150 people. You're like 2 tribes, right? So you can kind of do it through muscle. You can kind of do it manually. I can do it just through a lot of it just through my own personality as a leader. I can kind of keep it all together. I know half the people's names off the top of my head as CEO. And so that kind of does work for me. I call that invisible scale, right? The culture has not been diluted that much because I can kind of like get there with and this works for charismatic leaders. If you're not as charismatic, you're probably not gonna be able to do it.
Right.
Your charisma will take you pretty far. It ain't gonna go much past 300 though.
No.
You go to 500, 600, 700 employees, like you need real systems in place. So I start looking at, well, what types of systems do you have to manage those different areas of the business? So we use sales, for example. I have 10 salespeople. I can manage them. I can manage them off an Excel spreadsheet, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have 100. I can't. I need a good CRM. 30, I could probably get away with HubSpot. 150, I probably need Salesforce, right? Now I might be able to still get away with an automated HubSpot at 150 employees, 150 salespeople, or not, depending on how much automation it has, how much of the work it'll do for me. Because humans can only take me so far. And I'm using that. I think that's a really good example, right? There's different types of systems for different size. Also different need depending on what I'm doing in sales. So I look at that in every part of the business, right? Let's use HR, for example. Or accounting is a good example. I can get away with QuickBooks at like up to maybe 100 employees. At a certain point though, my business is so complex that QuickBooks just doesn't work. It doesn't have enough automation. It doesn't have enough point of sale stuff. It doesn't have enough of, the things that I need to manage inventory. So now maybe I need a more integrated system. Well, part of that comes with revenue. Part of that comes with people. It's all depending on the size of the business. When I'm small, though, I have less clients. I'm not managing as many counterparties. So what I found was at different stages of growth, there's different systems I need, both technologically, both manually, and both managerially. And most entrepreneurs are not put in a position where they have to go make those changes. Some do it well, some don't. The ones that do it well grow and learn and implement those new systems. The ones that don't, they get stuck and they stop growing. But it becomes a system game at a certain point and a strategy game. Strategy, I think, is less important though. I think strategy happens, people make a big deal about strategy, and mine's like, execution is the greatest differentiating value proposition, at least up to probably 1,000 employees. Beyond that, like, strategy matters more so.
Yeah, I think that that's fascinating to hear your perspective on that. Also, the numbers that you're quoting are your numbers. And I know a hell of a lot of entrepreneurs that need systems far before 300 people.
Oh, hell right? Yeah.
That totally fail past like 10 or 5. And you also had a really good caveat, which was for a charismatic leader, right?
Yeah.
And there are also tons of entrepreneurs that aren't that, right? That lead by the numbers, that hide behind a desk, that are introverts, that's just their thing. In sales, I look at the parallel in sales with, you can get great salespeople that never have a system for anything. They don't even have a particularly structured approach to selling shit. It's the person that you point to, and they can quote unquote sell ice to Eskimos or insert funny phrase, right? But is that system repeatable?
No.
Right. Can you scale that?
No.
Like, you can keep trying to hustle and find those people, and you certainly can to a size. It's just a different size based on the company, the person, the type, et cetera.
Yeah, I have a quote with this, which is, I always tell people, I want to build a business that has a lot of mediocre salespeople doing really well.
I think you said that to me literally a couple of weeks ago. And
Yeah.
I was like, that is what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Right.
That's system based though.
Totally.
That's system training. I want a product that mediocre people can sell because that's a lot easier to scale.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I said this in the beginning of the show, but I believe scale is a friction removal process, right? So I'm removing friction from different parts of the business, operationally, culturally, communication-wise, leadership-wise. How do I remove friction from the system? That will allow me to grow. Sometimes you need physical infrastructure, technological infrastructure. It doesn't matter. Like you can do a lot of it manually at smaller sizes. Even if you're introverted, it's harder because like you don't want to interact with humans as much, right?
Yes.
but if you're but you still can get away with it, right? Because they see you working, they respect you. Maybe they know you're not winning them over necessarily from having woo as your personality. Like I woo in my personality, I win people over, and it's like that socially too. If I'm an extrovert, I get away with shit that other people don't get away with.
Totally.
I could do something fucked up and be super rude, and people laugh because they're like, the way I said it was funny. Right. And I'm like, man, I was kind of a jerk, but I got away with it. Whereas someone who has a dry sense of humor will say the exact same thing and they don't get away with it.
No.
So their charisma is a factor that maybe gives you some leeway. But you can't scale that. It's not scalable. So I do think that in order to, when I coach entrepreneurs or when I'm building a business, I really look at it in layers. And it depends. When you're under $1 million, a lot of it's just about doing the work, right? And I think that it's less about scaling. Like people get really caught up, and it depends on the business. If you're SaaS, it's under $1 million is way more important than if you're a services business. What I mean by that is you really have to have systems in SaaS in order to scale above $1 million, 100 grand a month ARR, right? Services business, like I could get there doing half the shit, right? So it does depend on the industry, but in general, what I say is when I look at businesses or when I talk to people, I go, look, when you're a smaller business, you can kind of get there organically just through the leader doing the work, right? But if you have that thought of like, oh, I want to grow, I want to get to 10 million. At a certain point, you have to make the decision that you're going to be intentional about designing an organization that can scale. What do I mean by that? So depending on there's entrepreneurial operating systems out there like Traction, EOS, Scaling Up. I have one called ScaleMap. And so they're all about how do I get people to show up, be aligned, communicate well, execute properly, get shit done when they say they're going to do it. And then I have performance management metrics that tell me how well I'm doing. And it becomes this like feedback loop, right? That's like in a nutshell how you grow a business. There's different parts of the business you got to manage with that. Marketing, sales, ops, admin. But I look at them all, they're just all widgets in my brain. Hey, are we onboarding employees in the way in which they find success? And do we have any metrics to manage that? And are they engaged when they show up? And are we giving them what they need? That's an administrative KPI I'd be looking at. Operationally, are we delivering, are we manufacturing our process for our clients in a way that they enjoy, in a way that's profitable and efficient? You're going to have manufacturing KPIs to look at. Every business, I look at every business as a manufacturing business. And then from a sales perspective, am I bringing in people and taking them through a funnel and converting them in a way that is optimizing for profit, right? Those are three good examples. And so when I look at that, when I'm small, I have 2 salespeople, 2 ops people, 1 admin person to myself. It's like, you don't need a ton of systems for that.
Right.
You need to make sure you have the right people, because and that's a big one, by the way, no matter what your size is. If I have really good people, they'll make up for the shortcomings of the systems. So when I'm smaller, it's all people based. I need 10 really good people. Like I can't have 1 asshole and 9 good people. That doesn't work. That 1 person will ruin the other 9. So I got to have 10 good people. When I have 30 people, can I have 1 asshole? Kinda.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
So
also depends on the role, right?
if they're the COO, 1 asshole is not going to work that well, right? They're going to piss everybody off. I'll start losing people.
Totally.
If they're my head of sales and my salespeople are leaving, wrong person, right? Can't have that.
Yep.
So yeah, you got to be quick on your toes. I mean, I've made those mistakes where when I'm small, I bring in the wrong leader and they burn everyone up. And my answer to that's like, you got to be on your toes. You got to get them out quick. You can't wait. So when you're smaller, you have less of a room for error. Now, when I'm at 800 people and I have 8 leaders who are jerks, I got to figure out ways to find that data. I'm not even connected at that point as the runner of the business or owner of the business, or 150 or 200 people. Like, you don't know everything that's going on. So I need systems to tell me what's happening. And so I started developing some of those systems as I grew. I'm like, hey, I want to know what's going on. And I'm not in the field with clients. I'm not having one-on-ones with people 3 layers below me. How do I figure it out? But you need systems for that. So I call those performance management systems. We need to have some of those. And there's some easy ones. You can do like ENPS for employee net promoter score for your internal team. Gallup has a tool called Q12. I love that tool for my internal team. Externally, I do NPS. I have one person call on my behalf to talk to clients. Those get you pretty far. I talk about a lot of this stuff, and I wrote a book called Core Value Equation, which talks about how do you do this, right? Because the whole thing is like, listen, man, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. That's not me. That's God, I'm blanking on the guy's name. He's a famous thought leader in organizational development. But you have to design your environment to scale, And what I find is a lot of people want that magic bullet, that silver bullet, which is, I just need an integrator. I just need a really good like COO. No offense. I mean, we have friends that love that swear by that, and I agree with them to a point.
Right.
If I was shitty culture, bad systems, and good COO, they will probably fix the systems. The culture is questionable. And if I have a bad culture and a good COO and good systems, I'm still fucked.
Yeah. And to your point, that'll work to a point, right?
To a point.
Right. You can grow to a certain level. And I think it is worth asking to what level you want to grow to.
Totally.
Right. There are plenty of people. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they're a multi-7-figure founder, and he's done it a few times in a few companies. And he was like, I mean, do you only interview people that are 8 figures or up in the show? And I said, mostly, but the exception to the rule are people that are really impressive in other arenas. Like, we've had a couple people on the show that are 1-person companies doing $2 million a year.
Sweet.
With a 90% margin. And it's like, okay, they're aware that they're not there to scale.
No.
They built a thing for them, and their lifestyle and how they do it is impressive, right? And I think people can learn from that. But if your intention, I really would like my life to be driven by being deliberate in my outcomes and creating actions and a system to get me to the outcome. And to think that you're going to grow to 100 million or $1 billion and then put an asshole in place as the COO that's misaligned with you.
Not going to happen.
Probably not, right?
Yeah.
Probably not.
It's a learning process, though. I have a client who, a couple $100 million revenue. They were a client of mine when I ran my last company. And I remember when we first started working together, I said, I went and did a strategic planning session for him. And we got done. He said, what'd you think? And I'm like, half these people aren't going to be here a year from now.
Mm.
And he had there's 15 leaders in the room. And he's like, really? And I'm like, mark my words, half won't be here. And I have a friend that says a quote. He says, every time you double in size, you lose half your leaders. Because they're not cut out for the next size. They won't get you there. You'll know and I have a really good friend, Richard Manders, smart guy. And he says, you'll know you've made it when every single executive around you is way, way better at their job than you ever could be. And you can't find someone that can do it as well as they do it. So it's a way to think about it. He's like, that's when my job is done, helping the CEO. I thought that's an interesting way to think about it. Because I do believe that the entrepreneur CEO has 3 jobs. 3 roles, 3 jobs, 3 responsibilities. And if you nail these 3, you're good. And if any of these are fucked up, it's your fault. Number 1, you own the bench, the team. Like, if the team, anywhere on the team is bad, it's your fault. Why? You either hired the person or you hired the person who hired the person. And in some cases, you might have hired the person who hired the person who hired the person who hired the person. But it all rolls up to you. So you own the bench. If anything's fucked up, it's your fault. Number 2, you own the culture. If the culture of the company is not killing it, your fault. Why? Because you own the culture at your company. And last but not least, you own the strategy. And if you're not doing well, it's your fault because you're allowing that strategy to continue on. And so when we start thinking of our business that way and what we own as the CEO, and you can give up any one of those, you just can't be the CEO. So if you're not the CEO, you got to find a CEO who owns those 3 things. And it's interesting because I think that that's about having full accountability around what happens in the business. So I was always like, man, I own those 3. I was the number 1 recruiter in my company because my job was to recruit the top level hires to then become my C-suite. I love doing that. It's like being like a general manager of like the Bulls in the 90s.
Yeah.
Hell yeah, I want Dennis Rodman to come on my team.
Yeah.
Like, hell yeah, I want to, bring over this top performer. Like, that's how I thought about it. And I got really intentional about it. But I do think that, if we're trying to do better in our business, we just have to take ownership that we need to build our business with intention, to your point, and we got to pick our spots because we can't do everything at the same time.
So on the bench, what were the other two?
Bench, culture, strategy.
Love it.
It's real simple.
Yeah. Culture I know you for because you made a pink book and it stands out on my bookshelf. Culture, bench, and strategy. Let's talk about the bench for a minute. So through the process of ultimately hiring thousands of people, probably.
Yeah, thousands for sure.
Because you went to 1,000, then back down, then back up.
Yeah, I said I think I've hired at least 5,000 people in my career.
Good God.
Yeah.
How do you approach hiring? How do you approach? So I think about hiring in categories like sourcing the people, screening the people, onboarding the people.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. When you're smaller, you're going to be doing more of it. When you're bigger, as you grow, you got to build systems around it because you're not the one making necessarily the final hires. Mm-hmm. And it's just like accounting, like who's the last person to sign the check or to approve the expense. I have the same perspective around hiring. At what size do you let the CFO sign all the checks? At what size check do you require the CEO to sign? So the hires are kind of the same way. I do think you have to design for the outcome though. So for me, I'm a really big proponent, as you mentioned in my book, which is around core values, is leveraging values for hiring. Because core values are the fundamental beliefs of the business. And I want to hire for core value alignment. So I build that into my process. I have a friend, Rick Gerard, who is this really brilliant guy around how do you incorporate values into your hiring process. I'm forgetting the name. Higher Power is the name of his company.
I like it.
Yeah.
Great name.
Yeah, great name. He wrote a book about it. I would check him out. But he and I see eye to eye on this, which is if I hire people whose fundamental beliefs align with the company's fundamental beliefs, like I'll use an example. I know that you are like a hardcore badass, like you are ultra marathon runner, like you have a hard work ethic, like you get after it, like you're like a that's the type of human being you are. Like you're kind of a hardcore human being, right?
I might have a little of that in me.
Like a little. So if my culture in my company, my values in my company are all around like being driven, you're gonna do well there as long as I give you something to be driven about, right? But let's just say I'm like happy-go-lucky,
which is strategy,
What's
partly,
that?
right? To give you something to be hardcore about.
It could be for you, right? Like depending on who you are.
Got it.
But I know that fundamentally you are a driven person that likes to work hard. That is a value you have, right? You get after it. So I need to find, is the thing I'm going to give you something that you're going to like embrace? But more importantly though, is my organization a driver organization where being driven matters? Some aren't. Some it's like kind of chill,
right?
If you get into that environment and everyone's chilling, it's 5:01, everyone runs out the door, everyone takes their 1 hour lunch break, 1 hour yoga break in the middle of the day, you're going to be like, dude, what the fuck's up with this place?
Yeah.
You're going to be unhappy. So I'm not making sure I'm hiring you as a value fit. I've had that happen to me where like I was always a very driven entrepreneur, still am. And I remember I brought in my first office manager who came from the nonprofit world. Wonderful human being. Her name was Shelly Marid. And the company was 2 years old, and she was kind of like my right-hand person. Now, this is a culture where we show up at 10 o'clock in the morning, and we go to 10 o'clock at night, and we're on the phones grinding as a mortgage brokerage. And I was 27, and we worked our asses off.
Yeah.
And it was like, there was no lunch breaks. Like, it wasn't because it wasn't like I didn't want to not let people have lunch. I just like, dude, I've not taken a lunch in 20 years. I don't take lunches. I work. And I tried a few times. It just doesn't fit my personality.
Yeah.
I don't stop my team from taking lunches though. Now, back then, it was not culturally aligned. No one took lunches in my office. She needed her lunch break 12 to 1. She would have to have her break to go take a walk at 11 o'clock in the morning. She would have to have her afternoon break. And I remember watching her do this and I was like, what the fuck? And I remember some of my top people said something to me. They're like, what's up with her, man? 5 o'clock and I know she's out of the office. I'm like, I don't know, man. She's really good at her job though. But it became friction. It created friction in the organization. So when it comes to hiring, I do believe we want to filter for values big time. And that becomes the ultimate like decision maker of, is this person a good cultural fit? So for me, it's a cultural fit is like non-negotiable, because even if I filter for it, part of the time I still get it wrong, but I at least want to intentionally filter for it. And then it's skill. So for me, it's culture fit, skill fit, and then can we make a deal happen? And then as I scale, I got to design systems around that. A, can I manage to that? B, can my managers manage to that standard? C, can I double check that my managers manage to that standard? Because what I started learning was what I think is a real hire that's a cultural fit may not be what 2 levels down things. Maybe they are not fully aligned with me. So as I grew my business, I had to design for that. Now, as a smaller business, you don't need to. 100 employees, like, you get away with it. You do tandem hires, right? You like CEO can make the final say. You can be involved in all the hires, right? Depends on how many people you're hiring. I hired 140 people in 1 month in my business. Dude, that's great. 35 a week. Like, I'm obviously not involved in any of those hires. So what I started figuring out was, and the other thing I'll add to this was as we built our systems, like the way I did this all, by the way, is not because I'm smart. I'm telling you the good, not the bad. The bad is people were hiring fucking dipshits that were terrible hires that were blowing up when they came in, sucking. And I was like, why did we hire this person? And so I started figuring out, oh, they don't look to see that the person's had 18 jobs in the last 5 years. And they actually put this on their LinkedIn profile, right? So I had to create a rule, which was like, hey, if they've job hopped, you need second signature from an EVP in the company. Right? There better be, and we never hire job hoppers with exception. Then I had to go and get systems. Like there's a Criteria Corp as a company. They'll do computer literacy. They'll do verbal math, like all these different skills, IQ, like a small, like an intelligence test. And it said like, hey, this person's going to fail in the role as receptionist, right? They're just like, they can barely read, you know, like I don't want to be a jerk, but like, so I started saying, hey, if it's below the minimum standard, it's a no-go. Yeah. So I had to start layering in. Then I layered in, there's a book called Who by Jeff Smart, great book. He has a system called, Fork, fear of reference check. Yeah. So we built Fork into our system. And then I added in where HR, I mean, this is like over iterations where HR would double check every single reference. Right. But they would not just ask generic questions. They would ask more in-depth questions that were core value driven. So as time went on, I layered all these different things in to build a superior hiring process. All those did not matter when I was small because we didn't need to. Like, so when I could have done 20% of that and probably made a good hire because I was more involved. I knew what I wanted. I knew how to ask the right questions. I didn't yet train a team member on it. So it depends on the size.
But let me back that up to that time when you were hiring, or let's say you are in the situation where you're hiring every single person. And this kind of goes back to the charisma or the, salesperson that can sell ice to an Eskimo, so to speak. Did you know the criteria that you were looking for? And then did you already have the criteria in front of you when you were hiring? Or was it just this innate, like, oh, you're clearly misaligned with what I think is going to be a good fit for this?
Yeah. So I remember I did not have a process, and it was me just feeling them out and seeing if I liked them. And then I started realizing I like everybody, right?
I don't have that problem.
Yeah, I had that problem because my number 4 strength in Gallup Strength Finder is individualization, which means you see the good in people. So I was like, oh, I like this person. And then I realized, oh, I like this person and they're not good fit. And so I started figuring out disqualifying questions. I started figuring out what I needed more of. I have an article on LinkedIn called "How to Hire a Rockstar Executive Assistant." It's like 30,000 downloads or some shit like that. And in there, I say every reason why I suck as a CEO, why you'll hate working for me. And I learned that because of all the people I hired that didn't work out, because they might be great, but they're not great for me, right? And I'm a pretty firm believer that everyone has their shining moment. They just may not shine in my environment. Right. I don't think anyone wakes up, they're like, man, I'm going to be disengaged and hate my job and being an asshole all day. I think people wake up and they're like, my life's tough. And my job is either helping me be a better human or it's adding to my life sucking. And they have some ownership in that. And we have some ownership in that. But to ask the question again, I don't know if I answered the question.
The question was, when you started, did you have a clear path or framework, checklist, structure?
No.
For who you hired that you then inevitably put in place so other people could hire?
Yeah. When I started, this was 20 years ago. No, it was I just saw if I liked them. And a lot of entrepreneurs do I like them? The do I like them test. And some people call it, it's like, would I have a beer with them test? And it's like, there's plenty of people I would have a beer with that I should not hire.
100%.
100%, right? So I don't do that now. I don't even do that. And so I'm running a small consulting business now. I sold my ownership in my big company. This is the smallest business I've ever ran. I have 3 onshore employees and 3 offshore employees. And I have pretty good hiring process. Like we run them through Criteria Corp, same deal, multiple interviews. We see if they're fit, it's not as intense necessarily, but we pull references. We put them through a multiple hiring interview process. We ask specific questions. We do testing. We pull their strengths. I'm running a 6-person operation, not even. So my answer is when I started, no, I didn't. I think most people play it by ear. Like, I like that person. And I think that's terrible. I learned that because over time I saw myself make bad choices. I made good choices too. But just because I like someone doesn't mean they're going to be good at their job. Right?
No,
No,
100%. I also think that there are plenty of people. It's good to identify when you've had somebody on the team that isn't a good fit that you do like. And because you like them, it makes sense to let them go somewhere else. Totally.
Right. And so it's about, I firm believer of what I just said a moment ago, like, this is just not the right environment for their success. I want them to be successful. How can I help them be successful elsewhere? As one of my managers used to say.
Yes.
Yeah. And I thought it was fair. Like, it's a fair assessment. I want people to enjoy their job and be successful. So let's go back to my last business where I was 1,000 employees, CEO. I had 5 people reporting to me. So you got to imagine if they're reporting to me, they're like super high up in this company, right?
Yeah.
This is like a good sized business.
Yeah.
They're directly managing groups of people who are managing groups of people. So if I have the wrong leader in that role, it causes a fucking waterfall of shit. Huge problem. It'll fuck up like a third of the business, right? Or 20% of the business. I mean, it's a really big deal if you fuck up in those hires because it ruins the culture of the company. So you would think, I can't get it wrong. Darius can't get it wrong. Like, the pressure to get those hires right is way more than at the lower level, because when I fuck up, it affects such a large swath of people. Even then, I got it wrong a third of the time. And I'm telling you, man, some of these hires took me a year to hire them, a year of recruiting them. I'd be flying them all over the place, meeting with them. And these are super high level hires in like publicly traded companies. And I'm like getting them to like leave their publicly traded company to my privately held company. And like, they're working in a 10,000 person company and they're coming to a 1,000 person company. That's like a big jump for them. And they might fuck my company up, right? Because maybe they're too corporate or whatever. Even then, 1 out of 3 didn't work. And I was like, I know how much due diligence I do to try to make a good hire. And my business partner said, he's like, dude, you like it's crazy. Background checks, reference checks, fly them all over, test this, test that, 10 interviews, like you name, like a crazy amount of shit. 1 out of 3 wouldn't work out.
Why?
My perspective was that at that level, or in hires in general, that when you're looking for like the perfect hire, and in those roles, you kind of need the perfect hire, like, good is not good enough. They got to be great. And so if you're a leader that's looking for great, you're probably going to have more turnover, because you'll get someone that's bringing in B type performance, and that might work in most places. But when you're like, no, dude, A players, like only A players. When someone's rolling, if you're rolling deep in A playerville and a B player shows up, or B plus player shows up, dude, B plus is not good and everyone else is A. Right. It's noticeable. You're like, man, they're good most of the time, but they kind of drop the ball here and there. And you're paying them a lot too at that level. Right. But even if, like the more you get paid, the more you got to produce, right? The more you got to deliver. You're paying for certainty. That's the way I see it. And so if I'm paying you hundreds of thousands of dollars a year at this level, I'm paying for certainty and I'm paying for outcomes. And if I'm not getting it, B plus doesn't work.
So at that level, when you're bringing on, let's say 1,000 person company, and let's say you're replacing a C-level employee, several $100,000 a year, are you looking for somebody that has done exactly what you are trying to do? or is there wiggle room there? Can you apply, can you use like transitive properties and say, well, they've done this in a very similar industry, so I'm going to pull them in here?
Depends. So there's two ways I put people in those roles. Sometimes they're homegrown. So they've like worked their way up through the ranks, and I just see them successfully hitting the mark each time I move them up. And I'm like, all right, I'm stretching them one more time. But then what I'll do is I'll pay them at their lower level and promote them to the higher level and say 18 months from now, if you're still here, you hit the higher comp. So I did that with my chief people officer. Like, she was director of HR and she showed up. She got promoted 5 times. She became CPO. I mean, like, she worked her ass off. That she kept leveling up. So that's with her. With other hires.
Hey, hold on. And that's because she had not done exactly what you were looking for yet?
Yeah.
But you thought she had the capacity?
Yeah. Well, and I home grew her, right? So she was doing it, like, I was mentoring her. So she was my mentee. And I saw her capability, and I kept stretching her, and I call it throwing her in the deep end. I kept throwing her in the deep end, and she kept swimming to the surface. And then I'd throw her in her deeper end, and she'd swim to the surface. And she did really well. In that sense, we were building as we went. And, as an entrepreneur, you get 2 things. You get someone doing it your way, which might be good, depending on what you need. And number 2, I'm not paying top dollar because she's not bringing top dollar experience. She's bringing her relevant experience, which is one level down. Mm-hmm. She has to grow into the role, and then she gets paid top dollar for that experience. And she asked me once, she said, well, I have this role, but I'm not being paid. She pulled like a Glassdoor assessment of her pay. And I said, well, here's why. You did not bring that as an asset to the table. You brought the ability, and then you had to learn it. And once you've learned it and delivered on it, then I paid you for it. And she was thankful that I gave her the explanation. And then, we just kept bumping her. The other side of that is what you're talking about, which is, who do I bring in if I want, let's use a COO, or I had a CMO. I have a really good example of a CMO I brought into my company. So I wanted a badass CMO, chief marketing officer. And in my industry, mortgage, there was a company. They're the number 2 lender in the United States, called United Wholesale Mortgage. They're literally, it's like Quicken, United Wholesale. Like, they're massive. They're a publicly traded company. UWMC is their ticker. $16 billion company. She had been there when last year they originated $180 billion of mortgages. They're fucking massive. Mm-hmm. When she got there, they were at, I want to say, $9 billion. Mm. And I was about $10 billion when I hired her, of loans we aggregated per year. So she got to that company when my company was the same size as that company, give or take. She grew it to $30 billion. And she was chief strategy officer too. So I was like, well, she's taken this company from 9 to 30, and I'm at 10.
Right.
So I was like, she knows what that looks like. She's lived through that growth. She has that relevant experience. And so for me, that gap there was super important, because I was like, okay, she knows how to do it. Now, she came from Madison Avenue, and she had all these, her marketing chops are crazy. But the fact that she had done it in a competitor of mine who was like, they're badasses, and she was a badass in a badass company, check the boxes for me. So my belief is, you need to hire, you don't want to go 5 levels up. So would it have made sense for me to go to, let's call Quicken, and hire their CMO, where they were 10 times my size?
Right.
Probably not.
Right.
Because that person has not worked in a company this small.
Right.
So I actually want that, I want them to be maybe 1, maybe 2 levels higher than me, not 5 levels or 10 levels higher than me. So I do want them to be like within proximity, close to where I having worked in an environment fairly close to my size, if not like slightly bigger. It needs to be like relevant. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I do look at that for every position. This is why you see it all the time. People in our industry, especially in mortgage, like my past industry, people hire from big banks, and it's always a fucking bomb. Because big banks are so structured and so much bureaucracy, and they'll come into this entrepreneurial environment and they're like, where do you mean you don't have a training team to teach on this new SOP? And I'm like, we don't even have an SOP team. Like, what are you fucking talking about? What's an SOP? Right. I know what the word means, but like, we don't have that here. And they're like, we have a training department. That's all that they do. And I'm like, yeah, not here, man. We don't have any of that shit. So it's too big of a gap, and they don't have the resources they need, because theirs is much more narrow. Right. So I do want there to be proximity, and if it's not in the last job, if they went to corporate, and I want to see like, hey, when's the last time you were in a more entrepreneurial environment? Right. And if the answer is they weren't, nope. I won't hire people who have not worked in an entrepreneurial environment. Yeah. Very, very rare. Not in higher positions. Maybe at entry level. But it's rare.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I think that the last role comment is something that I latch onto, because if I see something, a decade ago or 15 years ago, my immediate response, and I've mishired like this. I've hired from, Fortune 100s, Fortune 500s, and you said it very politely, which was their role was much more narrow.
Right.
And I usually frame that as they're not used to working. And
they're used to doing this.
Right.
And your business is like, dude, nobody does that. Everyone does this.
Right. You have to have,
who's going to do this and this?
If not many hats, just like, a multicolored hat that changes periodically.
Yeah. and sometimes you get proven wrong on that, but like, I just don't want to take the chance, because when people see people come and go in your business, it's a problem.
Yeah.
It dilutes your culture. So I don't want people to see that.
Well, let's talk about culture, because it's a hot topic for you. And actually, when I met you, you were introduced as the culture guy, and you have a pink book about culture, and you came really highly recommended from a couple friends. And we got on the phone, and within probably 3 minutes, you had leaned heavily into, as you would, this book you wrote in culture, and my eyes started to glaze over. And then before I could close my eyes all the way, you pulled it back to, just to be clear, man, this isn't some woo-woo bullshit. Like, the reason that I care about culture is because it adds to ROI. And that was like, you're walking off the woo-woo cliff, and then all of a sudden I realized, oh, fuck. There's a reason. This is a very pragmatic individual and leader. There's a reason that he's doing this.
Yeah.
And that's what got my attention.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Most CEOs, entrepreneurs, and leaders I found are, generally speaking, operational people, finance people, or salespeople. Right. That's how you usually take on the role of an entrepreneur and CEO, because you see people and you're like, I can do this better. I can go bring in my own business, or I can go raise money to bring in my own business. Right. All three of those tend to be more left brain, like logic based humans. So when you start talking about woo woo culture shit, they're like, eyes start glazing over.
Yes.
Right. Now, I came from the banking world where it's extra, because it's all about, my business was moving money. Right. So it's like culture and moving money. How does that work? What I realized was really simple. There's kind of like 3 elements to scale. The bottom of the element is culture, which is what habits, behaviors, and beliefs do people show up with, right? And no one's going to argue that your habits, behaviors, and beliefs will not create how you show up and do work, right? Culture is that. What habits, behaviors, and beliefs happen in a business. And there's different elements to that. And my belief with that is people want to be a part of something greater than themselves, and they want to be aligned when it comes to habits, behaviors, and beliefs. And so your culture, if you can design that, can supercharge everything else. Everything else being operational execution and strategy, right? So strategy is, how do I get from A to Z? Execution is the steps I take between there and implementing those, the B, the C, the C to D, the D to E, that's all execution. But that all sits on like culture. Like, how are we talking to each other to go from A to B? How do we treat each other? Because I can go from A to B quickly and efficiently, or I can go from B to C and it's fucking gnarly and sucks. That's where culture makes a difference. So my belief is that core values are the tool that I love to use for that, because core values are the fundamental beliefs of a personal organization. So if I can align people's fundamental beliefs, then I can kind of define their behaviors and I can execute around their habits. If I do those things well, and I create an environment where that happens consistently, then I move from A to B and B to C and C to D and D to E and E to F quickly, more quickly than you do if you're not doing it, right? If you're my competitor. So that's why I said it's all about ROI. The glue that holds those different letters together and makes it happen faster is the culture you're building. Do I have a high performance execution culture where people give a shit? We move from A to B faster than someone that doesn't. You could have the same plan as I do. You could have the same goals as I do. You could want to go from A to Z and have it mapped out A to B, B to C, C to D, D to E, E to F, exactly the same way as I do. But who you get to show up to make that happen is, well, culture will define that. And so I care about all three, because if I have a badass culture and I got all these cool people showing up, but our plan sucks and we don't execute well, it's like, as I said to a client last week, I said, this is just a jerk off session. I like, those were my verbatim words, like probably not safe for work, but I said it in front of 15 executives. I said, this is a jerk off session if you're not making money.
Yeah.
So is that like, did I explain that well, or is there something you want me to add to that?
Sure. There are 1,000 things that I'd like to dig into there. But one of them is you were talking about how running, 100 people or 2, you can get away with not having systems and structure. And then it's not until you're bigger that it becomes really important. How about culture? At what point do you have to think about culture, and how can you, where can you get to without culture? Because, I think that brand new entrepreneurs go through this, read business books and see, okay, I'm supposed to design my core values and put my mission statement on the wall, and this is who we're going to be. And to your point, they are not generating any revenue at that point.
Right.
So when do you stop and back up and say, hey, I've got to make sure that the core values are rock solid and buttoned up in order to hire people? Do you do that on day one? Do you wait till you're at 1 million, 10 million, 100? What do you do?
Yeah, like I think 1 million is where it gets way more relevant. Like I have a consulting business that's a 7-figure consulting business. I haven't built my core values yet, and I wrote a book called The Core Value Equation. I mean, that's like my kind of embarrassing that I'm working on it.
I love that shit, man. It's, what's funny about that is that it's so common it's so uncommon for people to do what you just did, which is I'm preaching this whole thing, and nope, in my own house I don't do that at all. Or I haven't done that.
It just hasn't been super important because it's like me and 3 assistants, and they work with me directly, so they are filling my core values constantly.
Right.
And what I tell people is, when you're small, you can get away with that.
Love that.
But it's not that they don't think core values are important to me. It's not that they're not seeing what matters to me. I care about details. I care about the community. I care about hard work. They're seeing my values in action because they're interacting with me. So it's happening through osmosis, which when you're really small and you're involved, it happens through osmosis. Now, am I not eating my own dog food of defining what they are and doing a core value rollout and then measuring to it? It's just like, it's overkill. I don't need to do that. They are literally working with me so much that they're seeing it in real life. And they're being measured against it constantly because we're interacting constantly. So I think when you're small and you're like of that size and stature, you get away with it. It's not for very long though, because like you don't want to be involved in the business. And for me, it's like literally I'm taking the coaching business and partnering with someone to scale it, because I know I want to move into, it's a great business and there's a great product, but I want to move into private equity. And private equity, I will define that day one, because I'm going to be out there buying companies. And I want to do it a specific way. My last business, TMS, we built our core values before we launched because I knew I was going to launch quick. And I knew that it would be important quick. And I was right. So I think that when you're under 1 million or you're a small team where the founder, CEO, entrepreneurs, they are interacting with the team like a lot, it's less important. It's more client facing. You want the clients to see it, maybe investor facing. As you want to scale and bring leaders in, or you start to bring talent in aggressively, super important. You may want to do it pre-launch if you think it's important for your clients to see it, which it might be. But it's less important when I run a services business now. It's like it's small. Like my clients, like they're not going to choose to do business with me because they're doing business with me directly.
Right.
I'm directly advising them, right?
Yep.
For that specific type of business. So, but as it scales, it becomes more relevant. Like I probably just started hitting the upper threshold, and then we're at like 6 staff members where I'm like, I should probably roll out core values.
So tell me about the steps to do that. So you've got a framework for this.
Mm-hmm. So I wrote a book called The Core Value Equation, and it walks, like anyone who wants to do this should just read the book because it walks you through step by step. But the cheat sheet on it is, I believe that most people do what you said. Oh, I gotta build my core values. Like I read this book and it told me I was supposed to do it. Yeah, it's really important. Like we're all about integrity and excellence and service orientation and community. We care about that too, right? So everyone, like I literally described probably like 80% of the listeners. The reality is like
at least,
yeah, I did. It was funny. I'm picking the most popular core values that people pick. So I've been doing this for a long time and I know this stuff really well. And so that's the problem is let's say one of your core values is integrity or excellence, let's say, because I think easy pay direct excellence is probably one of your core values. I'm guessing. Like I know you care about excellence.
No, but it's certainly, it's not a stated core value, but it's certainly something that matters.
I know you care about. I know you, Brad, care about this
for sure. Yeah.
So maybe it needs to be weaved in there somehow.
Yeah.
the problem with that is like the way you deliver on excellence is different than the way someone else does. The way like you got swagger to you, man. You got like kind of like an edge. Your organization has an edge to it. You guys are in a certain part of the market that is edgy in of itself, right? So like the way you're going to deliver on it is different than say Ritz-Carlton. Maybe the quality of excellence is the same, but the delivery will be different because you're a different company. You have a different personality. Core values have the opportunity to become the personality of the organization. So I think what most people do is they get hung up on like, what is my authentic value? Like I need to define my values, right? What matters to me? I'm going to discover my values. And it's a well-worn path. You read any book about it, you got to figure out what's authentic to you. And I'm like, yeah, it's a well-worn path, but then nobody knows what they are and nobody does it. So I think that the issue is that everyone got caught up on discovering what their values were, but they didn't get like really good about how do I make them come to life. And I had this moment when I was at Birthing of Giants at MIT where we got asked, it was a graduation night, and the guy said, hey, stand up if your company has core values. Everyone stands up. This is graduation night. These are some badass entrepreneurs. We all learn we're supposed to have core values in our business. And these two guys who are running one of the top companies in Canada say, stand up if your company has core values. Everyone stands up, myself included. But mind you, I didn't have core values 3 years prior when I started in this program. Stay standing if you can say your company core values at the top of your head. We're the CEOs of the company. I sit down.
Oh, wow.
Half the room sits down.
Yeah.
So I was like, fuck. Story gets better. Stay standing if your employees know your core values. Half the remaining half sits down. Stay standing if your customers know your core values. Everyone sits down. And I had this, it was a turning point in my career. And I was like, oh, something's wrong here. Like we all discovered our values. Like my values were authentic to what I was trying to be. Why does nobody know their values? Why doesn't none of their clients know their values? Why don't their team know their values? And if your team and your clients don't know your values, do you really have values? Right? Kind of. Like if they don't know it, are they really doing it? And so I figured out that there was a missing aspect, which is, are they designed to be viral and sticky in the organization? Did we actually design them so that people can remember them and do them? Good example, this would be like, hey, if I say, hey, Brad, go to Walmart and buy a burner phone to go search the internet on for like $50. Like that phone's not going to be the best phone to do shit on. But if I tell you to go get an iPhone, it's like, it's better. It's designed for it. It's better. Both are phones. Both do go into the same apps. One's designed for more elegant use and one's not. Apple gets designed. So my book is all about how do you design them to become viral and sticky, and then what steps do you take afterwards? And I believe that there's really like 3 steps you need to take. Number one is, so I got to discover what's authentic. I got to design them to be viral and sticky so they can become the language of accountability in the organization. They got to be easy to remember. That's the key to all this, by the way. It's got to be fucking easy or else nobody will do it, right? Easy or no one does it. Like that's a rule of life I've learned. If you make shit hard, people just don't do it. If I make it easy, they'll probably do it. So I got to design for simplicity and design for elegance so that people, and for authenticity, right? Then I got to roll them out. I call this the core value wedding, right? I want to get people indoctrinated into my values. Then the marriage is ongoing. How do I keep them in front of people? And there's some very easy ways to do this because if I make it hard, people won't do it. And the last but not least, I got to measure for efficacy. What is it actually doing for the business? What ROI is happening? And I have some ways that I've designed on how you do that. And then that gives me data and I go back and I optimize for performance like anything else. But that's the way I think about it. And I believe if you do that effectively, at least the way I promote to do it, what ends up happening is organically your team learns the values and starts doing them and measuring people against them and hiring for them and firing for them. And, oh shit, man, Brad, that's not the easy pay direct way. You're out. Because we believe in X. And it's not this guy saying it or girl saying it for the first time ever. It's like, that's just the way we talk around here. We believe in this thing because we talk about it all the time. Why? Because it's the language of accountability. But you got to design for that. So
we've talked about this before, but how do you design for it? Who gets involved with what's authentic? And what does that design process look like?
I joked. I had a part in my book that I took out, which said, you're only allowed to be part of the decision-making process if you have to pay for the lawsuit when we get sued.
Should have left it.
Vern Harnish, who wrote Scaling Up, fought me on it. And he's a mentor of mine. And I was like, all right, fair enough. Like you do want executives or you want like thought leaders that have that really know the business. His perspective, and I agreed, and that's why I changed it, was, look, you really want people that know the personality of the organization. Core values of the personality of the organization. Is it what he said to me was this, which I thought was thoughtful. He said, look, Darius, you can be king or you can be rich. Pick one. So with core values, you try to be rich, you try to be king. And if you're trying to be king, then it's all about the founder. The values are just like a ripoff of your values. If you're trying to be rich, it's about the personality of the organization. And yes, you have some input in that because you're the founder. But organizations take on a personality of their own as they grow. Like the less involved you are, the more the personality will be pervasive, right? The more it will come to life. And it may not be exactly in the example he used was like a kid. He's like, look, like you can parent your kid all you want. They're going to be who they're going to be. And that's a company that really grows up is going to be who it's going to be. You can guide them and steer them. So it was a really impactful conversation that we had. It was right before I published. The reality is this is right after I locked the manuscript. I unlocked the manuscript and rewrote parts of the book based on this like thing I didn't realize. Like I was doing it. I just hadn't realized I was doing it. And it wasn't explicit in the book. And so, I do believe that core values are the personality of the organization. And I don't want them to necessarily mirror just my beliefs. They should mirror what the organization's trying to be. And it doesn't need to be 100% what I believe. It cannot be in conflict with what I believe. And so I think that you want to have leaders involved that really get the company, whoever those are. That could be a low-level person that's been here for a long time that really gets it. And it could be a salesperson that's like a lone wolf, but they get it. And it could be the C-suite. Could be a combination thereof. So I'm agnostic about their role. I'm more aligned with how well do they live and know the organization.
In terms of who gets together to articulate and clearly define what the values are.
Right. Generally, it's the executive team, but you may have non-executives if you have like a rock star who's just non-executive.
Yeah, that's part of it. Okay, so agnostic to who it is, but generally it's leadership. Definitely people that are bought in, get it, are all going in the right direction.
Get it. Get it. Because you may have people that they're new and don't get it. You're not allowed to be involved.
And so you said it's the company's values, and as the company grows, it's living and breathing.
It's its own thing.
Can they change?
Well, look, I think that the short answer is maybe. I have some design constraints that I put in, which is your values should be designed to last 100 years. So like what's relevant now should be relevant 100 years from now. But I'll give you an example of when values might change. Let's say you sell Easy Pay Direct to a private equity company. Company is a person, legally speaking. If you're not the CEO and maybe half your executive team leaves and they put in some hired guns, like those values may or may not be relevant at that point. So I had a debate with one of my founders about this, or excuse me, one of my mentors about this, because he said, well, what about, he used an example. And I said, well, did you pick the investor that was fully aligned with your values, bought the company? And the answer is this: depends on how involved you want to be afterwards. If I'm just trying to get a payday as a founder, I'm like, whatever. Like, yeah, I want my people left in good hands, like to a point, but I'm not going to give up like 2 turns of EBITDA for it.
Right.
Maybe I'll turn half a turn to EBITDA, so there's a price to everything. Now someone else might disagree with me. They might say like, Darius, I would never give up even a quarter turn to EBITDA for it. Someone else might say like, there's no price that matters. Like it has to be in the right hands. So for me, it depends on the person. If you're going to sell your company, values might change because leadership's changing and personality might adjust. In general, though, if I design and I'm really honest with what I want to build a company and the person, what is our personality, like the value of excellence probably isn't going to change.
Yeah.
These are like deep-seated values. Let's use the value of community. How do you go from being a non-community oriented company to if you're community oriented? I would argue that you are breaking values to become that. And if you do choose to do that, great. Just own it.
Yeah.
Because the worst is when people don't own it. And then they show up and they're like, our number 2 core values, family first. And then you show up and it's like, fuck your family. Get to work. Right. Yeah. And it's like, wait a second. You said our core values, family first. Yeah. Whatever. It's like, dude, the minute you do that, bolt in the head of the values. Like, just don't have them. At least make it ambiguous then if you're going to do it, because then people aren't going to be like, where the hell did I just show up to? And I'm using that in jest. I'm a believer of like, that's the worst when you do that, right? But people do it all the time. People break their values and like don't think twice about it. It's just a thing some consultant told them to do because they're not using it the way it's meant to be used, which is, how do I get an army of like-minded individuals to show up and make that shit come to life? Because when you do that, dude, that's awesome. Like, you ever been on like a winning team before?
Yes.
How awesome is it when everyone's like has each other's backs and like thinks the same way and like compliments each other? It's incredible,
it's amazing.
Right?
Yeah. And you automatically, by the nature of that team, everybody expels the person that doesn't fit.
They will expel themselves most of the time. They'll be like, this isn't the right environment for me. The more defined, the more polarizing that culture is, the better in my book. I would rather create the most polarizing badass organization and have the wrong people know they're not in the right spot than try to acquiesce to the wrong person 100 out of 100 times.
That's great, man. Well, I know we're coming up in time. Where can people find out more? We've got the core value equation.
Yeah, most of my stuff's at therealdarius.com.
Perfect.
So if you go to the Real Darius, you'll find links to everything else. I mean, that's kind of the hub. I'm on all social and stuff, but you can find that on the Real Darius. Core Value Equations, where all books are sold. My podcast, The Greatness Machine, which you've been a guest on. That's doing some awesome stuff right now. So that's a cool place if you enjoy this banter to learn more about my banter.
Yes.
So yeah, we had fun. Your episode,
we did have fun. You're back to the charisma. Your podcast is fun and engaging.
Thank you.
Well, yeah. And it's your personality and you're having a good time doing it.
Oh, I love it, man.
And I enjoy listening to that and things like it for different reasons than I would listen to something like this, right? Like, I'm listening to this. Hopefully I'm trying to provide actionable tactics and strategies that people can apply to their business.
Yeah.
And I think that you've done a really good job of delivering that here.
Thank you. Yeah.
But sometimes I feel like last time we recorded, sometimes I feel like I want to just fuck around when I'm recording. and it's fun to just do that.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
But there's a balance between, I think, and this goes back to kind of culture and what you're going after. Right. But I want to make sure that people they can't learn from osmosis with you by being around you, all of them. So I want to give resources that they can learn the things that they need to.
Yeah. It's podcast is a good spot because I do a lot of solos on the podcast, which is me just like pontificating on like shit that I learned.
Love it.
So, but a lot of my interviews is kind of like you, like I bring in people where I'm like, man, I want to level up. Like I've learned one of the biggest things I've learned this year, which has been cool through podcasts and through reading and through just hanging out like people like yourself is, sometimes there's this proximity opportunity where like you and I get to hang out, right?
Yeah.
You bring your dog into my house and we bullshit and we get to spend 2 hours together. Or you come to my birthday or I'll come see you downtown. But like most people probably aren't going to get proximity to you and me just because like we have our people and we're busy and sometimes people get added to that list and sometimes they don't. But dude, through today's like social media and podcasts specifically and books, like you get so much proximity to like people who have learned, it's pretty cool. I mean, like, you see the people I'm hanging out with. Charlie Munger, Ed Milet, Dr. Joe Dispenza. Those are my boys. They don't know me. When we hang out, I'm reading Angela Duckworth's book right now, Grit.
Oh, yeah.
You read that book?
No, I haven't.
It's a cool book.
I feel like that I would.
You would resonate with that book. Yeah, you got Grit. It's but it's cool. Like you get today, there's so much good information out there. I just think that people like, oh, if only I had a mentor. I'm like, bro, there's so many mentors out there. You don't need to talk to them. They spend 2 years writing their book. They spend a lot of time making sure you could learn from them.
Yeah.
Go get it,
All right. So the core value equation, the greatness machine.
Yeah.
Therealdarius.com.
You got it.
Darius Mirshahzadeh.
Boom.
That's right. I love it. I got it. Until next time, man. It's been great talking to you.
Brother.
If you learned one thing on this episode, share it with another entrepreneur. They need to hear it. Also subscribe so that new episodes just show up on your phone. It's a lot easier that way. And if you want the really good stuff, check out our free BAM! Tactics and Strategies course. It's where we curate the best tips, tricks, and tools that our guests know, whether they've shared them on the podcast or not. Just go to beyondamill.com. You'll also find previous episodes and show notes at beyondamill.com.